I'd like to welcome you here this evening to Solutions for a New Alberta, brought to you by the Alberta Prosperity Project, a group of grassroots Albertans committed to inspiring, advocating, and educating all Albertans on how we can achieve freedom and prosperity through independence. You know, we are all just regular folks like all of you. This group, the Alberta Prosperity Project, started in an oil field shop in Nisku in May of last year. A group of hardworking Albertans tired of top-down, corrupt, tyrannical governments meddling in their affairs. You know how that feels? That group of Albertans decided then and there that they were going to do something about our predicament. And from this humble beginning, the Alberta Prosperity Project was born, and here we are. I would like to invite our friend Tracy Least to start our event off with a prayer.
Let's just bow our heads. Dear Lord, we thank you that we can gather here and that we have been blessed with a facility as large as this is to house us all. Lord, I pray that you give us wisdom, clarity, and understanding, and bless us with the speakers that are going to present to us this evening. And I just pray for understanding, patience, and as we navigate these waters to get our province out of this storm. In Jesus' name I ask these things. Amen.
Thank you, Tracy. My name is Shannon Packham, and I'm from Patricia, Alberta. I'm a teacher, but I have not been inside a classroom since the end of February 2020 because I refused to allow the abuses that they were going to be heaping upon the children. That was the end of teaching for me, but what I discovered was that you can never be afraid to stand up for what you believe in, even if it feels like you're standing alone. I'm also learning to trust that there's a future waiting for us that's beyond what we might even be able to imagine. It is suddenly just like you know the time is right to start something new, and you trust it, and then you roll with it. These presentations that we have this evening are presentations of the seeds of hope and the seeds of change. The secret of change is to focus all your energy on building the new rather than fighting the old. So this is how things go. We have 3 presentations, and then we will have a break, and after that break, we will have questions and answers. Like, you guys ask the questions, I'm not giving you the answers. We have these little index cards at the back table and at the front where you came in, and we ask that you write your question on these index cards in your very best penmanship. That's what we like, because I have to read them. So then after the break, the speakers come up here, the presenters come back up on stage. I ask the questions, they answer them. And then after that, we have one more presentation, and then we wrap her up. So on your way into the building, you pass the membership table. That's how we keep the wheels turning on this bus that we're driving all over Alberta. We sell memberships. 1-year membership is $20, 2-year membership is $30, and a 3-year membership is $40. We also do accept donations. Anything that you are able to give, we accept greatly and appreciatively, and we will pass the bucket a little bit later on in the show. We also have a merchandise table at the back. We've got several different kinds of hats, golf shirts, and t-shirts. The hats are $40, the golf shirts are $45, and the t-shirts are $20. There's also window stickers, but I'm not sure how many there are left. They're $10. The bathrooms are out the back door. When you came in the main doors, they're to the left. Or I guess if you're going out there to the right. And the exits, obviously marked with the exit sign. So I've been asked by the Highway Memorial Center to read this mandatory announcement. I'm not really sure if I like those, but anyway. I like to use mandates as suggestions. Okay? In the event of a fire alarm, the building will be evacuated. 2 exits are located at the back of this hall. It's telling me to point. It's back there. And exit through the main front doors or the west service door. One exit is located to my right. This is my right. This is my right. Please proceed to the muster point located in the parking lot behind the building. If you can, please take your valuables and coats or jackets, but please do not congregate at the closets or outside the front entrance doors. This area must be kept clear for the responding firemen. Now you know. I do ask that you turn your cell phones off, please and thank you. But before you do that, I want you to go to our Facebook page, like the page, share the page, and tag a few friends. I'd also like to give a shout out to our volunteers, because without the volunteers, these events do not roll along smoothly, and I'd just be standing up here by myself talking. I'd also like to give a special shout out to Chad and Rhonda Wilson and their children, Carter and Reba. This is the second show that Rhonda's put on with standing room only in the last 3 weeks. All right, moving right along. Our first speaker is an independent researcher and a writer. He is a columnist for the Western Standard. He has a Bachelor of Arts degree with honors and a Master of Arts degree in political science from the University of Calgary. He obtained his PhD in political science from the University of Alberta. His book, Separatism, Then and Now, accounts how federal government policies have been designed to exploit the West, Alberta in particular. His other book, No Other Option, Self-Determination for Alberta, also boldly thrusts the argument for an independent Alberta into the limelight. He and his wife Ivy have 11 children, and they have been homeschooling for 25 years. Ladies and gentlemen, shedding some light on the independence journey, Mr. Michael Wagner.
Thank you, Shannon. So tonight I want to talk about the history of the Alberta independence movement. It's very important to see it from a historical perspective because it's not something that's just arisen in recent years. There's a long history that helps us to understand why Alberta needs to become independent now. Now, right from the very beginning, the West has been mistreated within Canada one way or another. This part of Canada, the prairies, used to be part of Rupert's Land, which was owned by Hudson's Bay Company, and was purchased by Canada and annexed to Canada. But there were people who were already living here, and they were not consulted about that. And when you think of the Red River Colony, in the Manitoba area, there were thousands of people there, and they were not asked if they wanted to join Canada. They were just annexed to Canada. And that's one of the reasons why there was a real rebellion in 1870, because some of the people had different ideas about what they wanted to do. They didn't necessarily want to become part of Canada. Now, after the prairies became part of Canada, many settlers were brought in to create an agricultural economy, to be farmers and to develop the land. These farmers were at a certain disadvantage because they were required to buy their equipment from central Canada. Basically, there was a protective tariff that basically forced the farmers to buy their farming equipment from eastern Canada, from central Canada, and they were therefore paying higher prices for that. At the same time, when they sold their grain, they had to sell it to the middleman. So the middleman took some of the profit. They also had to pay their transportation costs, so they lost more money that way. So the farmers had to pay more for their equipment and to sell less, get less for their product as a result of the way the system was set up for them. Now, there's a famous cartoon from 1915 that helps to explain this. You might not be able to see it from there, from where you are, but it's, many people have seen this before. It's a map of Canada with the cows standing across Canada, and the farmers in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta are feeding the cow, and the businessmen in Montreal, Ottawa, and Toronto are getting the milk from that. So that's from 1915. So already more than 100 years ago, there were people in the West who were very concerned about how the West would be treated within Canada. Now, they didn't just sit back and take it. The farmers were organized. You might remember in the 1920s into the 30s, there was a United Farmers of Alberta government. The farmers fought back. They organized politically and they tried to make changes. And they, although they weren't at that time looking for Alberta independence, but they were trying to make changes within Canada. And in 1935, Alberta did something that was very unique in the Western world, and it elected a social credit government. William Hart became the first social credit premier. It was something very unique. It was international news. And Alberta was the only province that did that at that time. Actually, the only province that elected a real social credit government. Now, because of that, Ted Byfield wrote this about what Alberta did when it elected a social credit government. Ted Byfield wrote, you remember Ted Byfield was the founder of the Alberta Report magazine that was published for 30 years. While other provinces whined about the Depression, Alberta acted. We would not acquiesce in the misery we felt and saw around us. We would fight. We would rebel. If anything is characteristic of this province, it's that spirit of defiance. Push us far enough and we will strike back. That was our record and that is our reputation. So Westerners, Albertans did fight back against these injustices that we suffered, but at that point, it didn't reach the level where people were looking for independence. Now, a threshold was crossed later when Pierre Trudeau became Prime Minister. He was the one who helped us cross that threshold, and for the first time, Albertans began to think seriously about becoming independent. Now, as soon as he became Prime Minister in 1968, he started doing little things that were annoying people in Alberta, but the big change happened in 1973. There was a war in the Middle East, which led to the price of oil tripling or quadrupling in price. So suddenly, Alberta was really in the money. We had a lot of money coming in. Trudeau did two things to prevent us from benefiting the way we ought to have. On the one hand, we kept the price of oil in Canada low, much lower than the world price. So when Alberta oil was sold within Canada, we didn't get the full price benefit. Also, Alberta sold lots of oil to the United States, and Trudeau instituted a federal export tax on oil, so that when Alberta sold the oil to the States, the federal government would get a huge amount of that. So Alberta was losing out. Whether the oil was sold in Canada or outside of Canada, Alberta was getting ripped off by the federal government. Now, you might remember that during the 1970s, Peter Lougheed was fighting Trudeau over this very reason, over this very issue. Peter Lougheed was fighting Trudeau. Peter Lougheed was a good premier in standing up for Alberta that way. Now, there was a federal election in 1979, and Joe Clark, the progressive conservative leader, became Prime Minister with the minority government very briefly. He was from Alberta, and it was expected that Alberta would get a better deal, but his government fell shortly after, within a few months of him getting elected, and so there wasn't a chance to see if he would do anything better. But so there was a federal election campaign in February of 1980 where Pierre Trudeau won the election. Now, there's something very distinct about this particular federal election. The Liberals basically pointed at Alberta as the bad guy and ran on a campaign of saying that Alberta is the bad guy, and if Central Canada will elect the Liberals again, then Alberta can be put in its place. And one of the federal Liberal campaign officials later would say that their unofficial motto was "Screw the West, we'll take the rest." And they did screw the West once they were re-elected in 1980. Of course, again, I just want to emphasize, this federal election campaign was very different from other election campaigns because historically, Canada is a very large country. There's lots of different regions with different interests, and so there's naturally going to be division across a big country like that. Historically, federal leaders would try and smooth over those differences and try and prevent the different regional conflicts. But in 1980, Trudeau did not try and smooth over the differences. He tried to exploit the differences. He pointed at Alberta as the bad guy, as I mentioned, and used Alberta, the campaign against Alberta, as a way of exploiting the differences to get elected primarily from people in central Canada. And that's what the "Screw the West, we'll take the rest" really meant. So after he was elected in 1980, a few months later, he instituted the National Energy Program, which was so harmful to Alberta. It was a federal power grab to take over as much of the Alberta energy industry as possible and hurt many people here. And there's something very distinctive about that as well in 1980. That when you look at polling for support for independence in Alberta, During the 70s, the polling support would show support usually at single digits, like 4%, 5%, 6%. After 1980, the surveys that have been done about support for independence in Alberta are almost always double digit. The lowest ones I've seen are like 15 or 16%, but they're often 20 or 25% or more. So that's why I call Pierre Trudeau the father of the Alberta independence movement, because he was the one who really got the movement started here, and he's created a permanent change where there's more support for independence in Alberta than there ever was before he became Prime Minister. So because of that support that he generated for independence, there was a by-election in 1982, you might remember, there was a small Alberta party called the Western Canada Concept Party, and they elected an MLA in a by-election in 1982, and that was the first time a Western separatist candidate had ever been elected. So Trudeau resigned in 1984, and he was replaced by John Turner. And there was a federal election later that year in September 1984, and Brian Mulroney's Progressive Conservatives were elected. So it looked like everything was going to be fine now. Like all of Alberta's MPs were with the Progressive Conservative Party, and they were in power, so they were going to save us from the Liberals, and everything was going to be fine for the West. At least that's what many Westerners thought. But it didn't turn out that way, because even though all of Alberta's MPs were part of the Mulroney government, most of Quebec's MPs were also part of the Mulroney government, and most of Ontario's MPs were part of the Mulroney government. I guess who had the most influence in the government. And we saw that very clearly in 1986. Because Canada had just got the CF-18 fighter contract, the CF-18 fighter jets, and there was going to be a maintenance contract. Those fighter jets had to be maintained. And so there was competition between which companies would be best to have the federal government maintenance contract for that CF-18 fighter jet. The two main competitors, one was in Winnipeg and one was in Montreal, and there was a special competition to see which of the companies was most qualified to maintain the CF-18 jets. And Winnipeg won. Winnipeg was the most qualified city to maintain those jets, and so Mulroney's government awarded the contract to Montreal. So you probably, as a conservative government, you probably remember that. This was a major betrayal. Like we've been voting, as Albertans, we've been voting for the Conservatives for years and years, and all of our MPs were Conservative, and yet when it comes to a question of contest between the West and the East, Central Canada always wins out because they have the voting power. As a result of that, of course, support for the independence movement began to rebuild. But someone else had a different idea, and that was Preston Manning. Preston Manning, saw the anger in the West, and he said, wait a minute, guys, let's not move towards independence. Let's reform Canada. Let's have a Western party. We'll elect our own people. We'll send them to Ottawa, and we'll fight to reform Canada and give the West, its proper place within Canada. Of course, remember, the motto of the Reform Party was the West wants in. We want an equal share of power within Canada like the rest of the country. And it made sense. It made sense at that time. Hey, let's try and reform this country. Things aren't working well for us. One of the main platforms of the Reform Party was the Triple E Senate. A Senate that would be elected, effective, and with equal representation from each of the provinces. So that made sense. The board said Alberta voted for the Reform Party faithfully. Over time, though, the Reform Party began to lose its emphasis on the West, and eventually was, looking to become a cross-Canada federal party. Eventually became the Canadian Alliance, and the Canadian Alliance merged with the Progressive Conservative Party of Canada to form, the modern Conservative Party of Canada. But the first Prime Minister under the Conservative Party of Canada was Stephen Harper. And Stephen Harper had been one of the early organizers of the Reform Party, and he's from Calgary. So Albertans really did trust him. So as long as Stephen Harper was in power, there really wasn't an Alberta independence movement, because one of our guys was in Ottawa. We could trust him to take care of us. Something that really did happen in 2015, though, because Stephen Harper lost the election to Justin Trudeau and his Liberals. And Justin Trudeau very soon began to bring in policies to support Alberta's oil industry. One of the main policies was Bill C-69, which became the Impact Assessment Act, which many people call the No More Pipelines Bill because it makes it so hard for new pipelines to be approved within Canada. It also brought in Bill C-48, the Oil Tanker Moratorium Act, commonly called the Alberta Tender Ban, because it would prevent Alberta oil from being exported off the coast of BC. Also, of course, he brought in the carbon tax and other climate change policies. Basically, the effect of these policies is to indirectly subvert the Constitution, because the Constitution of Canada gives provinces the ownership and control of natural resources. But if you can't export your natural resources, there's no point in developing them, because you can't go anywhere. So Trudeau was doing indirectly what the Constitution would not allow him to do directly. Of course, some of the provinces challenged the carbon tax at the Supreme Court, that the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the carbon tax. There was a couple of, 2 or 3 of the Supreme Court justices wanted to strike it down, but the majority of the Supreme Court voted in favor of the government's carbon tax. And one of the Supreme Court justices in his dissent from the decision, mentioned how by allowing the carbon tax to remain, that the Supreme Court was basically opening the door to federal intrusion into very many areas of provincial jurisdiction. So basically, that Supreme Court decision allowed the federal government to circumvent the constitutional guarantee of provincial control of natural resources. Now, at the same time as they're trying to shut down our resources, of course, they want our money. And an economist at the University of Calgary has calculated that between 1965 and 2018, Alberta has made a net contribution of $630 billion to Canada, a net contribution of that amount. So while they're trying to shut down our energy industry, they also want to take our money. Now, just to show you how recently some of this news is, like today, I know there were some new federal government climate change policies introduced a couple weeks ago, and on Saturday, just this past Saturday, the National Post had this editorial, "The Liberal plan to smother oil and gas." I think that's a really good short way of putting it. They want to smother our oil and gas industry. And of course, it explains in here, it says, "It hardly needs to be said that the plan disproportionately singles out the West, and especially Alberta." So that's the National Post helping to explain to us that what the government is doing to us. Now, there is good news. I have good news. There is a constitutional pathway for Alberta to become independent. As a result of Quebec's independence referendums, you'll remember that Quebec had independence referendums in 1980 and 1995. The 1995 referendum almost passed. And then in the wake of that referendum, the federal government sent a reference case to the Supreme Court to ask the Supreme Court if after a referendum, Quebec could unilaterally declare independence. So this was a Supreme Court decision on Canadian constitutional law. The Supreme Court said, no, Quebec cannot unilaterally declare independence. However, if Quebec held a referendum with a clear question and a clear majority of people voted in favor of independence, then the federal government would be obligated to negotiate Quebec's independence. Now, this was a decision specifically in the context of Quebec, but it's a decision that applies to every province. So any province can hold a referendum on independence. If there's a clear question and a clear majority of people voted in favor of independence, then the federal government is obligated to negotiate the independence of that province. Now, this is different. Canada's constitutional law is different in this way from many other countries. People have said to me in the past, well, they've used the example of Catalonia in Spain. Like just in 2017, Catalonia, a region of Spain, they voted for their independence from Spain, and the Spanish government arrested the leaders and put them in jail. And people said to me, well, if we have an independence referendum and we've passed that, then the federal government's just going to arrest our leaders, just like with Catalonia. But there's a very, very different situation in Spain. Spain has a constitution that forbids any of the regions from becoming independent. So that's part of the constitution to forbid that. In Canada, Canadian constitutional law allows it. So these are very different situations. And so we can't look to those other examples and say, well, because it can't be done there, it can't be done here, because it can be done here. Now, in the wake of the decision, the government passed the Clarity Act, which is supposed to spell out the details of how the secession reference case would be implemented. But there's many legal experts who think the Clarity Act is actually too stringent, more stringent than it needs to be based on the secession reference case. But the key thing to remember, we don't have to debate over these details of the Clarity Act or whatever. The most important thing to remember, the common citizen, all we need to know is that if there's a clear question on independence and a clear majority of people vote in favor of it, then we have the right to achieve independence. And I might just say too, independence is the Alberta's only solution. We've tried other things over the years, and those other things haven't worked. So, there's no use trying those same things again. The Tripoli Senate was a good idea, and they tried to implement that. Stephen Harper sent a reference case about that, but it's so hard to make any kinds of Senate reforms. It's so hard to get any Senate reform done in Canada because of a constitutional amendment would be needed. It's not very realistic. My view is that if Preston Manning and the Reform Party could not reform the Senate, then it can't be done. If Preston Manning and the Reform Party could not reform Canada to get the West in, then it can't be done. Preston Manning and the Reform Party, those were good people. We sent them there, they worked hard, they did the best they could. It wasn't their fault that it didn't work. The system cannot be fixed. It's just entrenched in a certain way. It cannot be fixed. The only way Alberta can get its We get a better situation is to become independent. We just can't keep going to Ottawa and asking, please give us more power. They're not going to. They just laugh at us. They laugh at us if we ask for more power. But if we hold a referendum and we vote in favor of independence, they won't be laughing at us then. So Alberta needs to rekindle that spirit of defiance that Ted Byfield talked about and become an independent country. Thank you. Just so you know, I've got a couple of books here. This one's No Other Option, Self-Determination to Alberta. This book explains why Alberta needs to become independent. It's at the back for $15. And a previous book, Alberta Separatism Then and Now. This is the history of the Alberta independence movement from the early 1970s through the Harper years, if you're interested in what's been done before. So those are available at the back if you're interested in more information. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Michael Wagner. Our next guest is a resident of Edmonton, educated over 17 years at the Universities of Alberta, McGill, and Stanford. He is a recently retired 30-year heart and lung surgeon and critical care specialist. He is known as the North American pioneer of heart and lung transplants, implementing the first heart and lung transplantation program in Western Canada, performing the first heart transplant in 1985, and the first combined transplant of heart and both lungs in 1986. The success of his programs grew to be the largest and most successful in Canada and one of the largest programs in North America. He's been recognized with numerous awards for excellence in medicine as well as in community service. He is an exceptional community leader and a brilliant mind, and he has always advocated for the overall health and well-being of the people. He is a key driver of this project as our CEO, and on top of all of that, he is an individual who has had tremendous political influence in the eras of Premiers Getty, Klein, and Stelman. He is here to talk to us today about Alberta's prosperity and freedom through independence. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Dennis Modry.
Yeah, she already gave me a timeline. Well, howdy, folks. Wonderful to be here. Wonderful to see so many of you here today. And I was just thinking, I don't usually say this, but I've heard this introduction so many times, I'm starting to believe it. But, you know, throughout my career, I operated on over 7,000 people, and it was always my, It was always my intent to try and improve the quality and quantity of people's lives. And now through APP, I'm trying to do it in a different way. Instead of helping one person at a time, I want to help 4.5 million people. So, price of gas. So a couple of weeks ago, we were in Medicine Hat. Some of you may have heard me say this, but I always get a kick out of it. So I hope, what's happening? Are we losing? Can you hear me in the back? Something's. Generator going down. I guess we need a new battery. Oh, we're back. What happened? All right, anyhow. So I pull into Medicine Hat with my wife and I need some gas. And then we pull into a shell that has these gas pumps that don't have a card reader. So I go into the little shop there and I say to the clerk, can you give me $10,000 worth of gas in pump number 2? And he looks at me dead pants and says, would that be regular or V-powered? It's a true story, I just thought it was really funny. A little bug. So, how many people here are pleased with the performance of our federal government? Raise your hand. Prime Minister? So, for those of you who have seen the Angus Reid survey report on January the 4th, 73% of Albertans are disillusioned with the federal government. Gee, no wonder. What about the performance of our provincial government? How many people are pleased with the performance of our provincial government? Well, what this really tells you, folks, is that we're all concerned about government at many different levels, whether it's government officials promising one thing and doing something else, or fiscal ineptitude, which, keeps causing our taxes to go up and up with no end in sight, or frank corruption or lies. A fellow by the name of Friedrich Nietzsche once said, I'm not upset that you lied to me. I'm upset that from now on I can't believe you. And doesn't that state it pretty accurately with respect to government? How many people here are concerned about their prosperity? The majority, of course. Well, again, you're not alone. Another Angus Reid survey, I think reported on January 14th, 87% of Albertans are concerned about cost of living and inflation, and for good cause, for good reason. So, and as well, a little while ago, I guess it was November the 11th, Jack Mintz, the chair of public policy at the University of Calgary, pointed out that ending our oil and gas industry will result in a 1/3 reduction in the average income of Albertans. So there's good reason to be concerned, because we truly are facing an existential threat to our very way of life, to our individual freedoms and rights, and an economic threat to each one of us if we do nothing. Now, it's not often we know the future, but we do know the future if you look carefully at what's coming like a freight train at us with respect to the Great Reset. We'll talk about that in a bit. But I'm here to tell you that if we come together for common cause and we do something that's never been done before, the future can be incredibly brilliant for all of us. Now, what is that? Well, fundamentally, that's the purpose of the Alberta Prosperity Project, is to unite all Alberta's businesses and organizations to protect your interests, your individual freedoms and rights, and your prosperity by enabling Alberta to chart a new path forward as an independent, sovereign constitutional republic. Now, so before we get into the details, let's just touch on the dilemma that we're currently facing with respect to freedoms and with respect to prosperity. Freedom, truckers. Prosperity, How many people would like freedom from being overgoverned, overregulated, and overtaxed? How about freedom from wokeness, cancel culture, critical race theory? And I love freedom from the Great Reset. Look at the freedoms that we lost. We truly do not have freedom of speech. We're talking here today, that is a semblance of freedom of speech. But if you have a conversation with someone who doesn't share your perspective on things, you are labeled a racist. Right. People are losing their jobs because they have a different perspective and they want to speak out about freedom. Now, what about freedom of movement? Look what's happened here. We still don't have full freedom of movement. It was a lot worse in the last couple of years. And what about freedom of assembly? Well, we've seen what's happened with that in the last couple of years, and you see how easy it is to block your ability to associate and assemble. And you saw what happened in Ottawa under the hooves of horses in terms of freedom of assembly. Now, what about freedom of families to be the moral culture, the moral, social, and cultural pillar to pass on to future generations things like responsibility, accountability, critical thinking, beliefs, etc. That's been usurped to a very large extent by the school system, and our opinion is that needs to go back to the control of the families, of the parents. And what about the freedom to own and enjoy property? Yeah. Right. How many people here own their homes without a mortgage? Well, just don't pay your taxes when you find out who owns your property. So the point is we don't even really have property rights, but I can tell you this, there would be the possibility through an independent nation of Alberta to eventually eliminate property taxes. I'm just telling you, that's possible. Now, insofar as freedoms are concerned, let me just touch on for a second the Great Reset. Now, I know people have a lot of, or many of you have some understanding of it, but in a nutshell, I used to think that it was a conspiracy theory until it became evident that it was, in fact, a conspiracy fact. So, but here it is. It's fundamentally an international movement, highly influential movement of the world elites, of the World Economic Forum, and the United Nations under a contract called Agenda 2030 to reset the global economy and to restructure the social fabric of society using banks and government agencies, along with environmental, social, and governance metrics to control billions of people. Everything that you do, everything that you buy, every place that you go. And here's the way it'll work. You're already hearing about it. So you'll be given an ID. So you'll be pinned, cataloged, categorized, tracked, and controlled in everything that you do. You'll be given a social credit score, which will determine the permissions that you are granted with respect to what you can purchase and where you can go and how far you can go, etc. As if Klaus Schwab can say, they will own nothing and be happy, believe it, it's coming, if we do nothing. So the question is now, let's have a look at prosperity from the perspective of our energy industry and confiscatory tax policy. Now, many of you know a lot about the energy industry as well, but you know that the federal government is intending on phasing out much of what we do, 42% reduction by 2030 of our energy industry. Now, at the same time, they're going to import oil from other countries around the world that don't have the same environmental or social standards that we do. We're all environmentalists, we want to protect the climate, but the key issue is what we do, is it really adversely affecting the climate? If you really understand Maurice Strong and George Soros when they came up with the whole idea to use climate change as a means of redistributing wealth, it's completely become mainstream now. But that is the genesis of the whole climate argument. Now, a little bit more on that. Many of you know that CO2 is plant food. And we have a carbon sink in this country of 320 billion trees, Muscat agricultural lands, that soaks up that CO2 and helps to build plants and trees, etc. Now, if you try and have a conversation, though, with an eco-alarmist or an environmental radical. It's pretty much impossible, it's extremely difficult. But what you can do with younger people is ask them the question, can I have your cell phone and can I have your computer? And say, well, you can't have it back until you understand that it comes from the oil and gas industry. I don't know how many of you know that, for example, if you have a gas plant and a coal plant that sits on 4 acres of property, if you were to replace that with a wind farm, you'd have to place wind turbines on 2,500 acres. How is that ecologically sensible? Plus, to develop those wind turbines and the solar panels, where do you think that comes from? The oil industry. And of course, it's not biodegradable, so again, it's not ecologically sensible. But one of the things that I find most frustrating is that so many people don't understand how many products emanate from a barrel of oil. So we were in Blackton not too long ago, and I asked the question, how many products emanate from a barrel of oil? And some gentleman, I love what his response was, he said, all of them. And I thought that was pretty accurate, actually, all of them. But it's over 6,000 products, everything from the roads we drive on to clothes, to makeup, to medications such as Tylenol and aspirin, anesthetic agents. And I like to tell this story about, without anesthetic agents, we'd literally be going back to the Stone Age, right? I mean, your surgeon would say, here's a couple of shots of whiskey, lay down, this is gonna hurt a bit, here's a bullet and put between your teeth, bite hard, because it's gonna hurt. So I just make that point sort of tongue in cheek because literally ending the oil and gas industry doesn't make sense at all. We have enough energy in this province to fuel, well, it's 97.3% of all of the oil reserves in Canada, enough to fuel North America's energy requirements for 1,000 years. Now, one of the things that I think you should be thinking about with respect to climate change is Patrick Moore. Remember, he was one of the founders of Greenpeace, but he's done a 180 and he recognizes that the whole climate argument is really untrue to a very large extent. And so what he's pointed out, for example, is that not one apocalyptic climate prediction, not one, in 100 years has ever occurred. Not one. So we're hearing all these apocalyptic predictions, and yet we have a track record of none of them occurring. Why should we believe that narrative anymore? So, how many people here know Steve Allen or who he is? Steve was a forensic accountant commissioned by the provincial government to look at foreign government spending to interfere with and prevent the development and transport of our natural resources. So he produced about a 700-page report that was released in July last year. And one of the things that he pointed out, amongst many things, is that between 2003 and 2019, $1.3 billion was spent to shutter our oil and gas industry. That funding came from to NGOs and various environmental organizations from other governments around the world and from other competitive companies that were in competition with our own oil and gas industry. They just piled on because Alberta was the #1 target by the United Nations and the World Economic Forum with respect to climate change. Alberta was the #1 target. So they just piled on because they benefit if Alberta doesn't benefit, right? In a competitive market. Now, did you know that our federal government also funded these NGOs and these climate, Suzuki Foundation, Tides Foundation, etc.? Your tax dollars paid to shutter our oil and gas industry. Doesn't that make you angry? And let's look at confiscatory tax policy. So somewhere in the order of $55 to $60 billion a year leaves this province through federal taxation, which we get back less than half, 27. And not only that, we overfund our pension plan by $3 billion a year. Think of what you out there who are pensioners. Did you use that additional $3 billion? I'll bet you could. And it could be a lot more than that as well, if we had control of federal taxation. And as Michael already pointed out, some $630 billion, and I think it's closer to $700 billion now, has gone from Alberta to Ottawa, for which we have not received 1 cent of that money. So the question, folks, is what are we going to do about this? So there are 3 options that we have. And I'm going to describe the first option this way. Consider Alberta is a canoe, and you're the inhabitants of that canoe. And that canoe is floating down the Niagara River. Eventually, you're going to hear the rush of the falls. And at some point, you have time to paddle like crazy to get to shore. But at another point, you're going over the falls into the abyss of the hell of the Great Reset. Is that what you want? The question is what are you prepared to do about it? Now, Michael has touched on the reality that we need independence. Let's explore that for a moment. Because independence can be within Canada or independence untethered to Canada. How many people here, just raise your hand, how many people would prefer that Alberta remain in Canada, but have far more control of its affairs and its wealth? How many people would prefer that Alberta stay in Canada? Okay. And how many people would prefer that Alberta just leave? Okay. So it's important to recognize that not everybody's on the same independence train. There are 2 right now. I think they can come together, and I'll show you how. Let's look at the prospect of fixing Alberta's circumstances within Confederation. And we're going to use the ending equalization as a metaphor for ending any egregious program that harms Alberta's interests. And we're going to look at it through the lens of history, the structural electoral imbalance, I just touched on that, and the constitutional hurdles. Now, from a historical perspective, you all know Alberta was incorporated September 1, 1905, thanks to the efforts of a gentleman by the name of Sir Clifford Sifton. He was the Minister of the Interior in unfortunately, the Liberal government of Sir Wilfrid Laurier. But what he said in 1904 was quite prescient, and it's helpful to understand what he said then to understand why we are where we are now. So what he said was, we desire, quote, we desire, and all Canadian patriots desire. Now, Canadian patriots at that time were the inhabitants of the regions of Quebec and Ontario, because Alberta wasn't incorporated into Canada at that point. So we desire, and all Canadian patriots desire, that the great trade of the prairies is Alberta's wealth, shall go to enrich our people in the East, to build up our factories and our places of work, and in every legitimate way contribute to our prosperity. Nothing has changed. 116 years, we started as a colony, we're still a colony, and we're still pillaged and plundered by the federal government. Now, Michael touched on the national energy policy. It's important to understand something here with respect to the national energy policy. It was sold ostensibly to Canadians and to Albertans as a means of redistributing wealth so that other regions in the country would have similar social programs. But what was happening in the late 70s portends a different conclusion. What was happening in the late 70s, that Alberta was becoming the economic center of power in Canada. There was a massive demographic shift of businesses and people from elsewhere in Canada and elsewhere in the world to Alberta. And why not? There was literally liquid gold in the streets. That collided. Oh, and the other thing was that all major banks were moving their head offices to Calgary, and one did, CIBC. Now, that collided with the Quebec secessionist movement. So the national energy policy, yes, to a small extent, was a means of transferring wealth so that other regions in the country would have comparable social programs. But there are two main reasons for the NEP. One was to prevent Alberta from ever again becoming the center of economic power in Canada, and two, to buy Quebec's loyalty to Canada with Alberta's wealth, which is why Quebec gets 2 of every $3 of equalization. Now you know the story. Now, not one federal government has ever protected Alberta's interests, our individual freedoms and rights, or our prosperity. And you know what? No provincial government has either. That's a really important point for you to understand when it comes to the next election. Who will actually, what government will actually protect your interests, your individual freedoms and rights, and your prosperity? We'll talk about that in a second. Now, if it's difficult for Alberta to remain in Canada and have a much better deal, then the other option, of course, is independence. Neither of them can be achieved right now because Alberta doesn't have negotiating power. But as Michael pointed out, you folks can give Alberta that negotiating power, that leverage. And the only thing is, and you know it, is a successful referendum on independence. Now, there are two things I want to say about that right now. One, Jeff Rath, who's a constitutional lawyer and litigator who's on our board, has drafted a petition that you may wish to sign, which would force the government to hold a referendum on independence. Now, if for some reason that doesn't go ahead, then the next option is subsequent to the next provincial election. Now, I want you to understand that that successful referendum on independence gives Alberta the moral and the legal legitimacy to chart a new path forward, as Michael said. It's worth repeating to understand that is the only thing that will work to protect us. Now, how would it work? How would things unfold? They'd unfold like this. So in 2023, you elect a government that will do these things. Number one, implement what we've referred to, and as similarly Rob Anderson from the Free Alberta Strategy has referred to, as the Alberta Sovereignty Act. So we came to that conclusion independently. But what it does, the Alberta Sovereignty Act does this. It accelerates the process of taking control of policing, pensions, immigration, employment insurance, and provincial tax collection. Because provincial tax collection, then, when you've got that infrastructure, it sets the stage for federal tax collection. In addition, it changes banking regulations for Alberta-based credit unions and ATB to absolutely protect depositors from CRA and from the darn federal government. Now, once you've done that, you actually set the table for that referendum on independence. You then have that referendum on independence, and we will be doing our job as the Alberta Prosperity Project to help educate Albertans. But that referendum on independence, when successful, gives the government the moral and legal legitimacy, like I said, to go to Ottawa and to negotiate with Ottawa and the provinces. And just like Brexit, England didn't get exactly what it wanted, so it took what it wanted and it said, we're out. And that's exactly what will happen in in Alberta. We don't get what we want through negotiations with the federal government and the other provinces, we're out. That's the way it is. So what is the Alberta Prosperity Project going to do now to help achieve this objective? Well, we're going to grow this membership to 500,000 to 1 million or more people. And why is that important? Yeah, give yourself a hand, because we're all in this together. It's important to understand, because the politicians understand what's called the 3.5% rule, coined by Erica Chenoweth, a Harvard professor who looked at societal movements over hundreds of years. And what she determined was that 3.5% of a population can change the direction of that society. Now, when Jason Kenney and the UCP were elected, they had 120,000 members. That's 3.5% of the electorate, of the voting public. So, if we grow this membership, which we will, to 500,000 or 1 million or more individuals, then we have created a movement that, like Ralph Klein used to say, find a parade and get in front of it, and you will be that parade that no government can ignore if they want your vote. So as part and parcel of this, we're rolling out, and we've already started a massive educational program throughout the province using an international marketing and advertising company called Rapid Boost as well. We're setting up educational chapters throughout the province. I thought we maybe aim for 90 to 100, but the growth of chapters and people who want to be chapter leaders, we may be at 200 or 300 within the next 3 months, educational chapters throughout the province. So the movement certainly has begun. So I'm going to end off by asking you to consider not only getting a membership, but if you have time, you might want to volunteer. And if you have more time, you might also want to set up a chapter of your own. And my final comment is this: freedom is not free, and you cannot have prosperity without freedom. Thank you for your attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Dennis Modry. He needs a new watch. So just a reminder about the index cards. We've had 2 presentations already, so you must have some questions about that. And also just a reminder that the volunteers will be passing the bucket probably during the next presentation. Our next presentation is from a young man who has recently moved to Red Deer. He is a brilliant industrial organization economist and a published author. He is a speaker and commentator on political and ethical issues and has studied under some of Canada's foremost economists. With his keen interest, wit, and bright mind, he offers so much perspective to the Alberta Prosperity Project, and he's here to demonstrate the many merits and benefits of a free and prosperous Alberta. He is also our acting VP of Economics. He cares deeply about the state that Alberta finds herself in and about how intrusively our governments meddle in our economy in order to facilitate our ruin. Ladies and gentlemen, here with an economic forecast for the independent nation of Alberta, Mr. Tanner Leday.
Just before I commence my speech, I want to reinforce what Dr. Modry and Dr. Wagner were talking to you about this morning over breakfast. I was reading the news, Western Standard, as it were. Quote, Suncor Energy's pit expansion proposal, this is a proposal to expand a bitumen mine, heavy oil, is unacceptable in its current form, says Federal Environmental Minister Stephen Guilbeault. He says emissions at this level may not align with the pace and scale of emissions reductions required to achieve our targets and would hinder Canada's international commitments in respect to climate change. Meanwhile, the Liberals just approved Bay du Nord development project from the Norwegian company Equinor, which will install and operate a floating offshore oil and gas production facility in the Atlantic Ocean near St. John's, which will be in operation for 30 years. This is the situation we find ourselves in, as you know. The year is 1965. You live on a farm. It's 5 a.m. on a Saturday morning. And you shuffle to the furnace to bank the coal and warm yourself up. But only for a little while. Because the cows need to be milked. So, you protect yourself in coveralls. You introduce yourself to the sunny and fresh and crisp morning spring atmosphere. And then you start to work. After accomplishing the preliminary chores, you retreat back inside for a toast with butter and maybe a coffee, and prepare to properly get on with your day. Finish breakfast, you once again greet the outdoors, revitalized, refreshed, and ready to conquer the daily chores. In order to do so, you begin by coaxing the cockshut 30 to life. I say so because it's spring, like today, and that means that there are rocks that need to be purged from the field before you begin to plant the crop. Of course, hydraulic stone pickers aren't mainstream yet, so you have to harvest the stones with your hands. Rock after rock heaved out of the earth during the April melt must be removed in order to make room for the monstrous 12-foot cedar come May. The work, as you know, is backbreaking. There's strong, and then there's old school farming, strong. And if you endure such a day as this, all other intensities of labor become insignificant. But such days aren't all bad. I say so because when it's time for lunch, you are served in the field a splendid, homemade spread of sandwiches, iced tea, and cakes, cookies, all brandished on the bed of a pickup for your consumption. And so the cycle repeats. How does this story, a story of a day in the life of my father's childhood, as it so happens, relate to economics? You and I noticed that when chores were light, the meals were light. When chores were heavy, the meals were substantial. A certain measure of calories, a certain expenditure of energy was burned every day. In order to replenish the calories exchanged for the purposes of manual labor, like hauling stones, a required intake of food was ingested. In this, the farmer lives out an axiom of economic principle. He intuitively knows what bureaucrats in Ottawa do not. You cannot spend what you do not have. Unless, of course, you're government. I read the federal budget yesterday. It was incomprehensible. It was illogical. Quote, the federal government is already on track by 2027-28 to deliver more than $72 billion in financial support through the National Housing Strategy. Budget 2022 proposes to provide $4 billion over 5 years starting in 2022-23 to the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation to launch a new housing accelerator fund. Budget 2022 proposes to provide $2.2 billion over 7 years starting in 2022-23 to Environment and Climate Change Canada to expand the low carbon economy fund, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. Well, says one. What's wrong with that? It's only spending, and governments are here to spend. What's wrong with that, he says. Think of the Canadian economy like a farmer. The farmer consumes food. The Canadian economy consumes dollars. The harder the farmer works, the hungrier he is, the more food he needs to ingest. The harder the economy works, the more it produces, the more output we see, the hungrier it is, the more dollars it needs to consume, to avoid starving and entering a cycle of deflation and recession. If the farmer eats too much, if the economy ingests too much money, the whole ecosystem seizes and stalls because it is inflated. Inflation, inflation, inflation. Which reminds me of the story. So as the banks seize accounts, a man lost all of his faith and trust in them, and for good reason. So, he buys a trailer. He pulls around town, and in that trailer, he stores all of his cash, all of his dollar bills. Millions and millions of dollars. A very, very wealthy man. Politician. And he pulls this trailer of cash all around town wherever he goes. He doesn't trust the banks. But one day he meets another man who asks him, what are you doing with that trailer? I see you all around town, all the time, holding this trailer. What are you doing? And he replies, well, I use it to carry all of my cash I've ever earned in my life. All of my income, all of my savings are stored in that trailer because I don't trust the banks. And so sure enough, the other man follows him home from a distance. The man parks his truck, parks his trailer, locks the doors, and he heads to sleep. He heads to bed. It's night. The next morning he awakes, heads outside, and he finds all of his cash still in place, stacked so neatly. Not a single bill had been touched. His trailer, however, was gone. And so, when I read the budget, along with past budgets, numerous ones, who can deny that government has overstuffed the economy? You know, suppose you haven't eaten in a day. It's supper time. There before you is a ribeye. It's beautiful. It's seared lovely. It's just gorgeous. The first piece that you cut and you consume is delicious. And it gives you a lot of satisfaction. You're starving, it tastes good, and so on. And the second bite does the same, and the third and the fourth. But when you get to the 24th ounce, eventually that steak doesn't taste so good. You see, the more you consume, the less valuable each bite of steak becomes. And the same is true of cash. The more cash you print, the more money you print, the less valuable each additional dollar is. But still, the government is spending and spending and spending some more, and printing and printing and printing some more. But as I said, the economy was full. It was finished. Its annual meal, so to say. And yet, the Bank of Canada continued to force dollars down its throat. And now, like food in a farmer's stomach who's had too much to eat, the dollars in our pocketbooks are turning sour. Inflation is roaring. My friends are being crushed by a weak dollar. Seniors' savings flutter away like smoke. And government might say, quote, the current global concern over inflation comes after decades during which inflation was very low. That's in the budget. But the past is gone. The mystery of the future is not ours to know. The present, however, tells me that Canadians who scrimped and saved across the decades during which inflation was very low are seeing those same savings wash away in this flood of worthless cash. But we will not stand for it any longer. We will, for ourselves, for our children, and for our parents, conquer the menace of inflation once and for all time. How are we going to do this? What can we do right now to slay the hydra of inflation? One, be wise with our money. Perhaps now, more than ever, if there was ever a time to be responsible with finances, it's now. And I have to disclose, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not an investor. This is not legal advice, but if there's ever a time to be responsible, it's now. And it's true, government isn't making it easy. But this is the hand that we've been dealt. Two, live like free Albertans. If we're going to be oppressed and crushed by the hammer of inflation, let it be so while we're doing sensible and human things. Camping, teaching, reading, playing music, dancing, attending meetings like this, and chatting with friends over lemonade on a Saturday. Government might try to break our bank accounts, but they needn't dominate our minds. Now this leads me to my third point. As you can probably tell, the hard and harsh reality is this. There isn't much the individual can do to stifle the invasion of inflation. And the reason for that is simple. The way you stop inflation is you stop printing money. You and I don't have access to that big red button at the printing presses which says stop. That's why, as an individual, it's almost impossible to conquer its menace. But there is hope for Alberta. So I tell you, an independent Alberta is the cure for inflation. How? By ensuring, constitutionally enshrining, in my opinion, that the monetary base in an independent Alberta must grow at a slow and steady rate, a predictable rate, every year equal to the rate of real economic growth in the economy. Now, like healing a disease, there might be more than one cure. I am a proponent of a gold standard, but you might want to use a K% rule, which means that you derive a mathematical formula that measures how much the monetary base grows every year. It might be a combination of them, instituted through a free banking system. Perhaps you have a K% rule and a gold standard, and so on. But what it will be is a guarantee that government's monopoly on printing money will be at once removed, immediately restricted, and forever confiscated away from the hands of a few powerful politicians. printing will stagnate, monetary inflation will be conquered, and self-interested politics will be removed from the monetary process entirely, as it needs to be. And when this happens, business will thrive in our province. Prices will stabilize, and living will be once again affordable. Investors will no longer need to worry about rogue governments ruining the monetary machine. And it is then, finally, that the virus of inflation, which now plagues so many, will not only be defeated in Alberta, it will be eradicated entirely. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Hnidey. So just before we go to the break, I'd like to introduce you to the people from our board that are in attendance. We've already met Dr. Dennis Modry, he's the CEO. Karen Leday is our VP Economics. Dr. Leday, VP Marketing. Pam Laird is our Events Coordinator. Hi, and Gail Northcott are rock stars at the membership table. We've got Chad and Rhonda Wilson that, like I said before, this is their second show in about 3 weeks. And the two volunteers from the merchandise table, I know Trudy and I forget the other lady's name. I'm sorry. And Natalie. And also, at the back of the room at the merchandise table is Jason Lemieux. He's from here. He is looking after all the merchandise, and he's also a chapter leader for this area, for the South region. Those are our volunteers. Oh, I always forget Walter, because he always just sits there and does nothing. He's the VP of Communications. He actually keeps things rolling pretty strong. So we're going to take a quick break. There's coffee and water. There's the merchandise table. There is the membership table, and the petition is out there as well. I recommend you sign that. We'll be back in 10 minutes. 10 minutes. And a reminder about the questions as well. recess is over. Ladies and gentlemen, children of all ages, get back into your seats. Michael Wagner, can you come to the front, please? I'm going to start if you're not in your seats anyway, so. Okay, here we go. Dr. Modry, Canada Day, and Mr. Michael Wagner are going to answer all of these questions that were not all written in your best penmanship. But I'll do my best. Have you an estimate of what the Alberta pension will look like for the seniors right off the hop? Will it be enough for people to be able to retire?
Well, Tanner and I will both answer this question. He goes second this time. But the reality is like I said, we overfund the pension plan by $3 billion a year. And there's no question that, it doesn't matter where you live in the world. If you're a Canadian expatriate living in the new country of Alberta or in France, you'll still get your pension. The difference is that as an Alberta citizen, your pension would be dramatically increased, as would old age security. And Tana, why don't you talk to them? About just how much contributions would go down.
This was a study recently completed by the Fraser Institute, and at the conclusion of their study, after researching all of the data and all the numbers, their discovery was that in order for Albertans to receive the same benefits they are at present, contribution rates for an Alberta pension could be cut in half compared to Canadian ones.
What about Saskatchewan, British Columbia, and Manitoba?
Yeah, excellent question as well. So we already have overtures from Central Okanagan. They want to start a BC Prosperity Project. And as well, they're there are overtures from Saskatchewan that want to do the same thing. And we've had people reach out from Manitoba, but we haven't quite got to the point where they're actually going to do the same sort of thing. But Alberta has to lead this independence movement, and there's no reason why at some point in the future that the dominoes won't fall. Alberta becomes independent, you can be sure Saskatchewan will be right there. Northern BC as well. Similarly, very likely Manitoba as well. But we can't predict these things. But what we can do is we can do what we can do in Alberta. And we can lead this whole movement for independence for Alberta, which can cascade into the other regions. And I'm excited about that because I think that'll happen as well.
Did Quebec ever sign the Constitution? People say they never signed on. Are they sovereign, but they stay with us because we give them all that money?
It's true that Quebec never signed on to the 1982 Constitution, but they're still a part of Canada because they haven't officially left. They didn't have a referendum successfully to separate. So they are part of Canada, but they haven't signed the Constitution. And that was what the Beach Lake Accord ordeal was about in the late 1980s, and they were trying to get Quebec to sign, and also with the Charlottetown Accord, but those things both fell through, and so Quebec still hasn't signed on, but they're still officially part of Canada until they hold a referendum on independence.
If a person is a landed immigrant now, will they be able to vote on the referendum to separate? Will they be given Alberta citizenship when we become a sovereign nation?
Right, so the question is remember, most of us here, many of us here, our parents or grandparents were immigrants as well. So for people that have immigrated to Alberta, they would be given an opportunity for Alberta citizenship. Oh, boy, that was difficult for me to say. But here's something interesting. If you want a little bit of a lever, think about this. If you're living in Alberta, whether you're an immigrant or you're not an immigrant, a new immigrant, and you have an opportunity to be a Canadian citizen or an Alberta citizen. But if you're living in Alberta as a Canadian citizen, you get the privilege of paying both Canadian and Alberta taxes. But if you're an Alberta citizen, you're just going to pay that really low Alberta tax rate. So the second part of that question was, would they be given Alberta citizenship? And I would say, well, why not?
Yeah. Will critical race theory be taught in schools? No. Do we have First Nations participating and support already?
Yeah, another excellent question. The reality is that Alberta independence is impossible without First Nations, the Indigenous population, supporting us. They represent roughly 5 or 6% of the population, but they have tremendous international influence as well. So fortunately, on our board, we have significant influence. We have a gentleman by the name of Lawrence Corderell. Lawrence is First Nations. He was a former chief. He's run a $100 million company. And he is our VP of Indigenous Sovereignty. In addition, we also extremely bright constitutional lawyer litigator. His name is Jeff Rath, and you might have heard of him, or if you've watched some of the grilling of Dina Hinshaw, he's one of the grillers. So, but Jeff is, like I say, he's a constitutional lawyer litigator, and he's looked after Indigenous affairs for over 30 years. And he's won cases at the level of the Supreme Court on behalf of the Indigenous population. So the two of them feel as though they can bring 90% of the Indigenous population to independence. So but for the very first time, they would be partners at the table of creating the new nation of Alberta.
This question is for Michael. You put your name right on it, so. How do we fight illegal governments who may never allow a referendum to go through?
Actually, trying to figure out the best way to answer this. Like someone answered something or asked something similar to this in Sherwood Park. Like, if the government already ignores certain charter rights, why would we think that they're going to allow us to proceed with a referendum? Well, I think there's a couple of reasons. One is that, see, the secession reference decision, which allows provinces to leave, was actually a gift to Quebec at the time. Federal government was trying to get the Supreme Court just to say that Quebec could not leave, and that the Supreme Court said, well, they can't leave unilaterally, but they can leave this other way. And that was something that's actually not in the Constitution, written in the Constitution, but it was something that the Supreme Court made. They knew that if they just ruled Quebec couldn't leave, that was going to cause an uproar in Quebec. So they wanted to give the federal government something, which was to say Quebec couldn't leave unilaterally, but they wanted to give Quebec something as well, which is to say you can't leave unilaterally, but here's a pathway where you can. So that decision is a gift to Quebec. So if the federal government was to prevent Alberta from following that pathway, it would be an affront to Quebec, it'd be slapping Quebec in the face because that was a decision that was made for them. So I think that would help to deter the federal government from preventing Alberta from leaving. And another aspect would be the United States. If Alberta, if we really had a clear question, a clear majority, that would give us democratic legitimacy with the Americans. And so I think that the Americans, partly depending on the American government, but the Americans would look at what we did and say, well, those guys don't really want to be in there. And so if the federal government of Canada is going to say, we're not going to let you go, they might have to deal with the Americans. And that adds another twist to it that would really give us strength in terms of our ability to leave. If we get a strong majority on a clear question, I don't see how the federal government can keep us in because we don't want to be in.
We've already had some contact with the Republican Party, and you think they're going to win the midterms? That'll help us. Plus they would have access to the north, they'd have access to our military bases. So there would be a lot of incentive for the U.S. to support what we're doing, which gives us international credibility as well.
How do you address getting our resources to Tidewater as we will remain a landlocked republic?
It's an excellent question. We're often asked, how would Alberta get its resources to international communities? And the answer is we would do it much better than we do now. Let me quickly take oil first. We tend to believe that all of our oil that's harvested in Alberta, which composes some 98% of Canada's total proven oil reserves, which are third largest in the world, we tend to think those are harvested and then shipped off immediately to the coast to be transported around the world, but they're not. That isn't the way it works. Our oil is exceedingly heavy, as you know, and this is actually a good thing because we can divine so many products from a single barrel. Light oil is nice too, but you can't do as much with it. With heavy, you can refine it, and then you can put it to a plethora of uses. So, What we do at present is ship it, not to the coast, but south, to America, to the Gulf, where huge refineries, substantial refineries, they're magnificent, take our oil and refine it into usable product. In fact, 99% of all of our oil exports go south. They head to the Gulf Coast. That's where it's refined. More than that, Mexico has just announced, who is America's second largest exporter of oil, that next year they're shutting in. Not a single barrel of oil from Mexico, which is also heavy oil, is going to America or any other country. That's a very large discrepancy that's going to need to be filled. And here we are, wouldn't you know it? So, it isn't a concern at all. Now, finally, we tend to believe that we're landlocked. At present, we're policy locked. Suppose that Canada was exceedingly upset that we gained our independence, and they said, we know that you still ship goods and so on to port, to Vancouver, and they come to you through port. And so we're denying you access. Suppose they said that, and they tried to impose their will upon us. As an independent nation, we would be free to flex our economic muscle. And so, in retaliation, I would have no problem saying, fine, we know how large the Vancouver ports are. We know that they're some of the largest in the world. We know that a vast portion of your goods and services come from Vancouver and head east to Ontario and Quebec. And so, unless you give us access, we are imposing strict, heavy tariffs upon every item that's shipped through Alberta. And if you still won't do so, we won't let a single good come through Alberta. Yeah!
Including overflights. There's one other thing, and that is the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, Articles 124 and 125, do permit landlocked countries to get their products to tidewater. So as Tanner said, we have a lot more control if we were not part of Canada, and we could control our own destiny.
In the free and sovereign nation of Alberta, who would regulate and collect the land taxes?
Who would collect and regulate the land taxes? Well, that's a really good question. With respect to municipalities right now, they're the ones that collect property tax. And with that property tax, they pay for schools and various other things, and roads and that sort of thing. But I can tell you this, that there's no reason why at some point in the future, with a booming economy, it is economically possible to eliminate property tax. So the ultimate question, hopefully, is no one will collect property tax. That's what we would like to see. Tough question.
Would a loyal property be a consideration once Alberta has independence?
What was the question?
It's like, will we be able to own?
Oh, right, yeah. That's a loyal, we have to look up the word loyal. Yeah, so the bottom line is, yeah, we would be able to own private property, but for the first time, like I said, you would actually have ownership of it. And if you don't have to pay taxes, you actually personally then own the property. And you're free to sell it, develop it, or whatever you want. But that's the answer to the question, I believe.
Does a successful referendum not require passage in both houses, the House of Commons and the Senate, plus a majority of the population? It's got Michael's name on it.
Actually, that question sounds more like a constitutional amendment. In order to have a referendum, it just needs the provincial government to actually hold that referendum, or they might have to pass a law or something, but the referendum itself can be completely done within Alberta itself. Now, when it comes to amending the Constitution requires that an amendment passes the House of Commons and the Senate, and minimum 7 provinces representing 50% of the population, something like that. But to hold a I think, I'm trying to think if the Clarity Act says that has to be done, I can't remember, but in order to hold a referendum, you don't need those. It's completely different from amending the Constitution, much easier for a province to hold a referendum. So that's nothing to worry about. And it's because the Constitution is so hard to amend, that's why Alberta's independence is the only option. Because if we want to change the Senate, to get a tripling Senate, we have to amend the Constitution. That would require the passing the House, the Senate, getting all these provincial approvals and stuff. So it's because the Constitution is so hard to amend that independence is Alberta's only option if we want to improve our position politically.
To add to what Michael had to say, something interesting with respect to the Clarity Act, which is why the question has to be a good question and the result has to be a resounding yes by Albertans because of the way the Clarity Act is interpreted. So the clear question and the result has to be approved by the House of Commons. But the House of Commons won't approve the question, nor will they approve the result until after the referendum.
Actually, I think I misunderstood the question. The question probably had to do with the Clarity Act rather than the Constitution. But as I mentioned, there's a lot of scholars who think that the Clarity Act is actually more stringent than the Supreme Court decision. That's why I harp on the Supreme Court decision itself, because the Supreme Court decision is constitutional law. And constitutional law supersedes any legislation passed by the House of Commons. So if the Clarity Act, like people think the Clarity Act, they put in more obstacles there to make it even harder for a province to leave than the succession reference case allows. And that's why these scholars who say the Clarity Act is too stringent, that what really matters is the principles laid down in the succession reference case. And so we don't have to worry about all these other things. If as Dr. Modry says, it's a clear question with a resounding majority, that's our ticket out. And they can't, these other obstacles we'll be able to brush them away.
How are you going to approach the ethnic people in the cities? Do you have a plan for that?
Well, the ethnic folks out there, do they not want freedom? Do they not want low taxes? I think they do. A lot of them, of course, many of you are thinking, they've come from other countries and they feel like they've landed in, the greatest country in the world. And in many respects, it could be. But what we have to do with the ethnic community is very much like with all of you. And that's to educate them on what they can have and how much better life can be for them. And that's what we're offering for them. So think about this, they're not leaving, Canada's already left Alberta. So yes, they'd be leaving Canada, but they're not leaving the Commonwealth. So, and that's something I'm not sure many of you understand as well, is that the intention is for Alberta to become a sovereign constitutional republic. There are 54 nations that are involved in the Commonwealth, and 34 of them are constitutional republics, such as we are advocating. It's just that we don't deign fealty to the monarchy. In other words, the monarchy would have nothing to do with the future of Alberta. But I think we have to, I think the other community can be convinced. I have many friends and associates within the ethnic community, whether they're Japanese, Chinese, Indian, Sikh, you name it. And they think very much like we do as well. A lot of them are business people, and they understand the problems of high taxes and ridiculous regulations. And they want out from that too.
So I just got the signal from the boss back here, so I gotta wrap her up. This is a very good question. All the questions are good ones, but I have to pick a few. This one says, I'm 70 years old. How long will it take to get this independence?
Welcome to the club. So here's the deal. 2023, you elect a government that commits to protect your interests, your individual freedoms and rights, and your prosperity, and that will hold a referendum on independence. So in the first 18 to 24 months, that government takes control of policing, pensions, immigration, employment insurance, and provincial tax collection. Like I say, that sets the stage for the collection of federal taxes. In addition, there's the Sovereignty Act, the Alberta Sovereignty Act, which I touched on. It changes banking regulations to protect depositors from CRA and the federal government. Now, you've set the stage for that successful referendum on independence. Timing is 2025 for the referendum. There's no reason to think that it needs to take longer than that. Now, if in 2023, some party that embraces what we are talking about has 80 of 87 ridings won, well, under those circumstances, you might want to have the referendum even earlier. But I think it's safer to take control of those things, which sets the stage for that referendum. And so I would envision 2025. Thanks. And you'll only be 73.
And just to let you know, if I don't ask the questions, I do send them off to the board of directors and they answer them. They go on to our website. So if you've written a question and you're quite upset that I didn't answer it, I apologize, but we've run out of time. This is a question, the next couple questions are about chapters. Are there chapters set up in Calgary and Edmonton? Has there been events in Calgary and Edmonton? And are they planned for the cities? We did have an event in Sherwood Park last weekend. It was well received. Sherwood Park's not Edmonton, I understand that. There was over 500 people there. And from those 500 people, 245 of them purchased memberships. Out of those 245 people, 87 of them wanted to be volunteers and 42 wanted to be chapter leaders. We do have some chapter leaders from the Calgary area. They are just getting things rolling in Calgary, but if you want to be a chapter leader, come see me. We'll talk about it. The next question is, what is a chapter and how do I start one? You come see me, we'll talk about it. Our chapters are basically the way that we're getting our information out to the communities. So Rhonda Wilson is a chapter leader, and I recruited her from the Monarch show. And I'm not even gonna lie, on the membership forms, there's 3 little boxes. If you even hover your pen over the spot that says chapter leader, I will call you. I'll know. So I called Rhonda and I said, hey, you checked off this box. She's like, yeah, what's it all about? I said, you get to do all this stuff and all these great things. So look what she's done. You're all here. You've been here twice. I do with all of the information that you're ever going to need for your chapter. All of the PDF files, videos, a chapter leader handbook. All of those things are on our platform. You get to go on, you can use whatever you want. All we ask is that you spread the word. You spread the word to your neighbors, to your friends, to people in the supermarket. I do it all the time. Somebody says, hey, where's the coffee? I'm like, oh, it's right over here by the Alberta Prosperity Project. And it works. The next question says, when are your next meetings or events and where? Well, tomorrow we're in Drumheller, so if you think you missed something, hop on over there, it's not far. Staveley is on the 22nd, Cowley is on the 23rd, Sundry is the 24th, Slave Lake is the 29th, Athabasca is the 30th, and Barhead Westlock is on the 1st of May. We're rolling hard. We've actually had so many requests in the south and also in the north. Pam Lair is our events coordinator for the South Central. And Michelle Plant is the events coordinator for the Central North. I think they overlap a little bit. What we're running into is we need 2 Dennises and 2 Tanners and 2 Michaels, and we only have the 1. And trust me, you're not ready for 2 of me. You're just not. My last question is for the audience, and it's a very good question. My friend John Sampson wrote it. It says, who here is going to leave here without buying a membership? Nobody. I'd like to thank our presenters for answering the questions, and we'll get rolling with it next week. Dr. Modry, Catherine Leday, Michael Wagner. We're not done. Don't go home. Sit back down. Sit back down. I got a surprise. Sit down. Honestly, I have a surprise. Okay. Our next guest really doesn't need much of an introduction at all. His reputation precedes him. And I've heard him speak on many occasions, and I can tell you that the passion that he has for what needs to be made right in this world is contagious. He is a courageous defender of the rights and freedoms of his fellow Albertans. He is a very passionate man, standing strong and sacrificing so much for the well-being of his family, his friends, his neighbors, and also for perfect strangers. He has recently returned from a journey to Ottawa, where he joined the front lines in the convoy for freedom to end all mandates. He advocates for truth, he advocates for freedom, and he does this everywhere he goes. Each event that he attends builds on the one before. And I can tell you that the last shows that he's been at, the crowd was on their feet before I even said who it was. Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Scott from the Mississauga.
Thank you very much. I kind of feel like the Grinch after Christmas, and my heart grows a couple sizes every time I get that kind of a welcome. So thank you.
Thank you.
So, what did you all think of what those 3 men who were much more intelligent than me had to say tonight? Where did we take that? One of the most frequent comments I I get is how do we unify all these people to work towards this goal? And there's a lot of different ways to do that. This is obviously a great way. How many people came to this meeting tonight unsure of whether or not independence was the only path for Alberta? If you were unsure, raise your hand. Of those who were unsure when you arrived here today, how many of you are confident and you have your mindset that Alberta independence is the only path that we have to be prosperous and free as human beings? So the first part, education, extremely important. A lot of people that I talk to, they don't even know that we have a problem. There are people who still send me random messages saying, what freedoms have you lost? Take your jab and shut up. They don't get it. You need a little bit of education. Some people we're never going to reach. That's just the way it is. Human beings are not all the same. Some of us are way over here. Some of us are. That's okay. You don't have to reach everybody. You certainly have to reach a majority. So education is probably the most important task that we have right now. And that means everyone in this room has a job. And your job, I don't know if you've ever heard me use the radio analogy. But you all have to take this message and you have to start spreading this message everywhere you go. Where people are at, you have to be radios relaying this message of hope. That's exactly what it is. This is the message of hope. Throughout this whole thing, ever since I opened my restaurant, because I had just had enough of the BS that was being pushed on us, people have approached me with things that I should, or they wanted me to be hopeful in. All sorts of different paths. Canada's not even a country. Oh, the Constitution isn't even real. The government's not real. All of these things, people have tried to instill hope in me by telling these things. And everything people have told me, or I've read or seen, I always think to myself, is this plausible and is it probable? And 9 times out of 10, it's neither. And so we don't focus on those things. And we search out solutions that are plausible and probable. Both of which Alberta independence are. So back to the unity thing. The most common question I have right now. How do we unify all these groups? What about all these political parties? And the answer is, it doesn't matter. What matters is, we continue to spread this message and continue filling rooms like this, educating people as to why, well, first of all, that we have a problem, what the solution is, and what it looks like, how we get there, and what it looks like after. We have a golden opportunity here to be leaders on arguably a global scale. Because while the rest of Canada has been watching Alberta throughout this whole thing, we're kind of Wild West. We had the Great Burger Rebellion. We have our Chief Medical Officer of Health was just grilled for, I think, 5 days over her handling of this pandemic. Alberta actually got somebody into court to answer questions that should have been asked in the beginning. And people are watching. The rest of Canada is watching. Which kind of leads me into one of the other things people tell me all the time is, how did you go to Ottawa and see that unity across this country, people from all provinces, all walks of life, everything, unifying towards one common goal, to end the mandates? How do you become a separatist? Well, first of all, I'm not a separatist. We're actually secured quite firmly within the land of Canada currently. We cannot separate. We can't exercise independence for sure. And the answer came to me as I talked to my family after I got back from Ottawa. Canada is all facing the same problem right now, and that is, if we don't do anything, we're going to own nothing and be happy. Or miserable. Tanner says we'll own nothing and be happy only with a lobotomy. But that's where we're going, right? It's not a secret. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's actually right out there. You can go on the United Nations website and you can read it. You can read the documents that Canada has signed on to that tell you and you and you and you, not you, no, you too. It tells all of you that you can't own anything. In order to move forward as a species, we need to remove the useless eaters. 6 billion people. The magic number is 1.5 billion, if I recall correctly. That's how many people those folks who see us as useless eaters think that the planet can accommodate. And the truth is, the planet can accommodate way more than we have now, but they don't want to admit it, because that doesn't follow their science. So Canada's going down this path of will nothing be happening. So what do? Do we fight it within the federal government? Do we ask the federal government and our MPs to stand up for us? What happens when we ask our MPs to stand up for us as Albertans? Their voices are drowned out by the East. We don't have a say. We don't have representation. We have representation, but it's not fair representation. Our ideals, our morals, our ethics, our way of life will never be acknowledged on a federal level in this country. That's a sad reality, no matter what we do. And you might say, oh, well, what if we rebuild the CPC and we elect people that are going to be our voices? Really? We just did that with the UCP, and they weren't our voices, were they? They're not going to save us from this. The NDP certainly isn't. If you read their manifesto, it reads like Karl Marx's manifesto. Oh, nothing, be happy. Government tells you where you work. Government tells you where you live. Government tells you what you eat, how much you eat. If you speak out against the government, you don't get to eat as much the next day. That's how it reads. That's where we're going. Now, let's bring it back to Alberta. How many people in this room do not want to own nothing and be miserable? Somebody didn't put up your hand. I will meet you at the front doors and I'll take your bank cards and credit cards. We have a golden opportunity. And believe it or not, the opportunity was given to us by COVID. Because COVID did something amazing. Harmed some people, that's not amazing, it's terrible. But it opened a lot of people's eyes, mine included. Because before this, nothing affected me. I worked in the oil patch for 20 years. And you know what? It was kind of the roller coaster, feast and famine. But at the end of the day, I was making good money. I could do what I want. I could go on vacation. Nothing affected me. So I let other people be my kings and queens. I let other people be my leaders. And I expected them to save me from that extreme left agenda. You know, I didn't really like Jason Kenney, but he's a conservative. He's going to lead. He's going to save us. He's going to save Alberta. And I didn't get involved. Enter COVID stage left. All of a sudden, my rights and freedoms that I was told in elementary school were mine forever were disappearing. I could no longer earn a living. And then a judge actually told me that I couldn't protest. A man in a silly black gown had the nerve to tell me that one of my rights, God-given rights, was going to be taken away by another man without justification. You all know how that turned out. Ended up going to jail. Wasn't as bad as you think. But as my rights and freedoms kept on disappearing, and I started to stand up and say, hey, this isn't right, enough is enough. Other people started sharing their stories with me. And my tribulations, like my impact on my paycheck, all of a sudden became insignificant. Because now I'm talking to people who said goodbye to their grandmother with an iPad. I'm talking to families who actually went to their mother's long-term care facility and smashed the window to hug her on her birthday. other families that weren't so fortunate. Their elderly family members were locked in these homes for months, and they just gave up and died because they didn't have their family. Caged like animals, left on their own. The stories that I heard absolutely broke my heart. Money became less important than what other people were going through. And it got me thinking, if the government can do these things, if they can take away our rights that we're led to believe are always going to be ours, what else can they do? Then I started thinking about what they're telling us they want to do. And I realized that yes, they absolutely can use. Because an appointed official with almost zero practical experience can sign a piece of paper that says, Christopher Scott may not open his restaurant and serve coffee to his customers. How is that possible? And the answer sucks. It's possible because we were lazy. Because just like me, a lot of you in this room didn't get involved because it hadn't affected you yet. You were comfortable in your lives, you believed you were free, and you just continued on, hoping somebody else would save you. Well, that time's gone. Nobody is coming to save you. And I'm glad to see these rooms filled up with people like you, because you are the people, you're going to save each other. It's not a politician, it's not some leader, it's not me, it's not any of the three men up here, it is you. It's this movement of people who believe in freedom, who felt like something was wrong for the last 2 years, and finally made the correlation from their heart to their brain. Now we understand what's going on. And when you understand the problem, that's the first step to finding a solution. So we attend these meetings, and we listen to these things, we listen to these solutions. And the more we listen to them, the more we talk about them, the more questions you ask, the more attainable this becomes. When each of you start bringing 5 people to these, or 10 people, trust me, people don't mind standing when they're hearing this stuff because it's giving them hope. When you start accelerating this movement like that, those people who are telling you, you must vote for me or you're going to get Rachel Notley. That is not a very good argument. I got an email from Rachel Notley today, and she told me that I had to help her fight Jason Kenney. Now, I don't particularly have a lot of love for the NDP. They do have some good qualities. They have some great people. Some amazing people, as a matter of fact. I don't need them to fight other government on my behalf. I need them to hear my voice. I need them to represent me. I need them to see my rights and freedoms and your rights and freedoms as paramount to anything else they want to do. I need them, we need them, to recognize that we are human beings and the rights and freedoms we have are not from them. They're from God. And nobody takes them away. Now you might say, I've heard this argument before. This stuff is all in the Constitution, right? It's written right in there, right in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, under the supremacy of God and rule of law. The Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Constitution are not garbage. Our forefathers, they had the foresight to think about tyrannical government. Not so much as they did in the United States, where they said you can form a well-armed militia to protect yourself against tyrannical government. But at least they recognize that it's not government that gives us our rights. They're from God, we're born with them. And they were saying that nobody is going to take these away from you unless it's justifiable. But we've delved into this chaotic, weird time where words, their meaning is twisted and they're used against us. Justice Germain told me that my jailing and closing my restaurant, chaining it shut, was justifiable because I may harm somebody. What? Give me a break. Anyway, the point is, I don't know what the point is. The point is, we have these rights and freedoms. We see them being taken away all over the place. It's all over Canada, it's not limited to Alberta, but Alberta is different. Because we started standing up, and when one person stood up, it wasn't me, it was actually Adam Skelly, I watched what he did, and that encouraged me. But when people start to stand up and say enough is enough, other people will follow them. It gives them hope. Hope is not some weird long-lost document that promises to give Canada back to people if they just present it to the Queen. That's not hope, that's a fairy tale. Sorry. The hope that we have is you, these rooms filling up with people who want solutions. And you come here and you listen to these men speak, you hear the solution, it clicks in your head, and now you have to tell other people. That is critically important. You have to take this message home with you. Take it to the grocery store. Take it everywhere you go. And here's why. When we stand up as Albertans and we say we will not live under the thumb of a federal government that doesn't recognize our rights as human beings under God, when we do that, we will set an example for the rest of the people in this country. And they will follow. Because they want the same thing as we do. It doesn't matter if they're a liberal, NDP, conservative voter, whatever. They want the same things as we do. They want to be healthy, safe, prosperous. They want their families they want to have good family lives. And when we do it, we're going to set an example. We're going to lead by example in this province. And we are going to be the people who bring the rest of this country out of the own nothing and be happy scenario. None of the other groups that I've been involved with or spoken at are going to do this. I'll tell you that right now. She's going to kick me off stage. None of them will do it. Don't lose your focus. And when we unify as a group moving towards a common goal, with the solution that's been presented here, all those other groups have an opportunity to get on board with us. And they will, as long as we lead by example. That's all I got.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's stop. I'd like to invite Chad Wilson to the stage. He's got some words he'd like to say. One of these times I am going to tackle Chris off the stage. I'm going to do it.
Thank you, Shannon. Well, just a few words to say here in regards to everything, but I want to especially thank Chris for opening for me. I've been on the call, but not bad. Anyhow, on behalf of Rhonda and myself, I want to thank everybody for taking time and come here tonight to listen to the information provided by the Alberta Prosperity Project. We were encouraged by friends of ours from Taber to go to the presentation at Monarch, and I thought, what in the world have I agreed to go to? I've got better things to do with my time. However, talk about the bolt of lightning hitting me right in the forehead. Because everything, it answered a lot of questions to me as to why we need to do it, why we haven't been able to do it. Chris said, go to the grocery store, tell everybody, tell all your family, tell all your friends. I've been raised that you can't talk politics, but you can't avoid it in places. That's fine, you might get balls of mud thrown at you. Anyway, tell everybody, tell your grandkids, tell your kids. It's gonna be uncomfortable. You're gonna find out there's gonna be more and more people that agree with you. They're just afraid to ask about it. I've learned that in the last month and a half. Yeah, so in the last month and a half, I am amazed at the number of people that are thinking the same way everybody in this room is. So I want to thank everybody that came tonight. I want to thank Shannon, Dr. Modry, Mike Wagner, Chris, Pamela, Dale, and Ty Northcott, Jason Lemieux, everybody. I want to thank my wife for putting this together 2 times in a row. I'm pretty amazed she just does a fantastic job. I want to thank everybody that donated anything for cookies and snacks, coffee, right down to Nat water, Nat spring water out of Nat, and donating all the water for this. Brad Wallace, anybody buying water, go right to the source. Thanks again, and we hope we can do it again in a bigger venue.
Thanks, Jack. So that covers the presentations for today, but I'd just like to leave you with some parting remarks. We need all of you to join us. We need you to lead this event, and we need you to be excited about taking back your freedom and your prosperity. We need you to be excited about taking that into your own hands. We need to grow this community, this movement, this growing wave of Albertans who have had enough. This is a people's movement. We've got one chance to secure the future for our children and our grandchildren. We've got one chance to gain the freedom and prosperity, and that is by electing an independence-focused government in 2023. We need you to buy memberships. We need you to become chapter leaders. We need you to be volunteers. We need you to create events in your communities that bring people together. We need you to start a prosperity garden and then share that space with your neighbors and share the bounty with your neighborhood. We need people with vision, ideas, and energy. We need to show our friends and neighbors that there is hope. This is hope. We need to be the change that we want to see in this world. So talk to your friends and neighbors. Talk to perfect strangers. I do it all the time. Spread the word any way that you can. We've got good people at our table. We believe in the good of humanity, the good of community, and the good of our friends and neighbors. And together we can make a difference. Our solution, like Dennis said, with no politicians at the table, is to have, well, he said 1 million people, more than 1 million people. All of Albertans need to stand together. We're doing something that's never been done before. We're making history right now. And I'm asking you to be on the right side of it. We wish to see the rights and freedoms and the dignities of all Albertans restored. Accountability in government and courts and bureaucracy for the children, the grandchildren. Let's just unite and take back our province. Samuel Adams said, "It does not take a majority to prevail, but rather an irate and tireless minority that is keen on setting the brush fires of freedom in the minds of men. When you leave here, I want you to start those brush fires." Progress is impossible without change. We've planted the seeds of change. Alberta will become a sovereign constitutional republic. One where First Nations people sit at the table as partners in the creation of a new nation of Alberta. And on that day, Alberta truly will become united, strong, and free.